What's happening, MMA fans, mixed martial arts fans, boxing fans, combat sports fans? Ryan Thomas here live on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. A big day for the show, no doubt about it. Before I get to the big show, later, probably within the next hour here, as I'll be joined by a special guest. I had to hop on the live stream. I had to hop on the airwaves here and give my take on the night of fights that was UFC 257, Dustin Poirier, Conor McGregor, the rematch that was almost 7 years in the making, and the co-main event between Michael Chandler and Dan Hooker. Last night's fights were fantastic. There's no doubt about that. I have to say, though, I need you guys to tune in to this AFC, NFC preview and prediction show. I will be joined by a very special guest on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast to preview and predict the AFC NFC championship games that take place today. 3 o'clock, Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers head to Green Bay, the frozen tundra of Lambeau Field, to take on Aaron Rodgers and the big bad Green Bay Packers. But then the baddest team in the NFL currently, the Buffalo Bills, head to Arrowhead to take on the reigning, defending, undisputed Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. Obviously, we're going to be diving deep into that one for obvious reasons. It goes without saying. Before that show is recorded, I had to do my due diligence here, hop on the live stream, and give you guys my take, my reaction to UFC 257, the night that was last night's fights, in the UFC 257 post-fight reaction show. Guys, ladies, gentlemen, the story of the night, the story of the event: Poirier stuns McGregor and the MMA world. I'm not going to lie to you. I didn't see it coming. Did I think that it was possible? Of course, anything is possible in the sport of mixed martial arts. It is the toughest sport to predict by far. It's not even close. It is the toughest sport to predict. And when I did the pre-fight show previewing McGregor and Poirier, I did believe that Conor McGregor was going to win this fight. Did I think it would come easy? No, I did not. I gave Dustin Poirier the credit, the due that he deserves. That Dustin Poirier is a far better fighter than he was 6 years ago. Most fighters are a much better version of themselves, 6 years after the fact. So I wasn't shocked that Dustin Poirier was able to tangle with Conor McGregor in the slightest. I think both guys, when they first fought, they were extremely young. Their confidence levels were a lot different. Dustin might have had some insecurities. Dustin might have had some immaturities, falling for the trash talk of Conor, essentially hook, line, and sinker. And that led to the knockout loss, in my opinion. And I think Dustin would agree to that. But this time, the experience that Dustin has accrued inside the cage and the experience that has been missing from Conor McGregor's career, essentially the last 4 years, he's only fought 2 times in the UFC octagon. That is astounding when that is said to us before the fight. And in hindsight, it makes sense as to why we saw what we saw last night in terms of the result of last night's fight. Now, that is a double-edged sword here. I don't want to take anything away from Dustin Poirier and what he did last night. What he did last night was incredible. It was amazing. It was entertaining. It was fun. And it only took place over a span of, 5-6 minutes. Early in the second round, Dustin Poirier was able to finish this fight. And I think it goes to the fact that there are levels to this game. There are levels to this division. But the UFC lightweight division, despite the fact that Poirier stunned McGregor and the rest of the MMA world, as the headline says for the show, the UFC lightweight division is the most entertaining division in the sport. It is the Shark Tank. It does feature the best fighters. It does offer the best matchups. And last night's card, to have a main event at lightweight, 155 pounds, to have a co-main event at lightweight at 155 pounds, I think that was a true rarity in the sport for us to lay witness to. And it was something that I greatly enjoyed because it provided us with a solid narrative post-fight, hence this post-fight reaction. What's next for Dustin Poirier? What's next for another winner on the card, Michael Chandler. And in particular, what's next for the quote-unquote losers of UFC 257, Conor McGregor and Dan Hooker? But how did Poirier get it done? What did I see from Dustin Poirier that allowed himself to achieve greatness last night on a grand stage, the grandest stage of them all, a main event slot, title fight or not, main event slot against the biggest name in the sport in Conor McGregor? What allowed that to happen? I watched the fight this morning, went to bed very late last night, woke up, very early. I probably got about 4 or 5 hours sleep. Watched the fight as soon as I woke up because I couldn't stop thinking about it. And Dustin Poirier implemented a fantastic game plan. His game plan was phenomenal. And the game plan was early on, initiate the clinch, work to get the takedown. Conor gets back up to his feet, which Conor is known to do. He's very good at getting back to his feet. We're going to keep him on the clinch. If Conor separates, we're going to attack the lead leg. Conor brings a wide stance in the striking department. With that wide stance, you have a lot of weight on that front leg. The southpaw stance that Conor has is a wide, low stance. If Poirier could attack that lead leg, attack it via the calf kick, which Justin Gaethje made so popular in this sport, before long, Conor McGregor is going to fold. That leg is going to give. And what I saw was not only did Dustin Poirier land those leg kicks to that lead leg time and time again, right before the fight was finished, Dustin Poirier had his back to the cage. He fires off a lead leg kick to Conor's lead leg and circles. When he circles, he's then facing Conor McGregor, and Conor then has his back to the cage. In the octagon, you're caught in between that edge of the octagon. It literally, as the logo shows in the corner, the octagon, you're in like that southwest portion, that slide between the back or the front, I guess you could say, of the octagon. And that's where Poirier really had McGregor trapped, in that zone, in that bend in the octagon. Once McGregor had his back to the cage, not that many fighters are great with their back to the cage. You're able to trap your opponent with his back to the cage in that fold. It's very tough to get out of that bend. It's essentially comparable to, a fighter being stuck in a corner, fighter being, put in a corner, whether it was Ali versus George Foreman, Joe Frazier and Ali. There were times where Ali was trapped in the corner, the whole rope-a-dope mentality, but you can't rope-a-dope in mixed martial arts with 4-ounce gloves, with Dustin Poirier throwing just the barrage of punches. And with Poirier facing McGregor, Poirier facing his opponent with his opponent's back to the cage, that's where Poirier is at his best, and that is proven to be, time and time again, where Conor McGregor is at his worst. And I'm not kicking a man while he's down here. It's very tough for any fighter to be great with their back against the cage. That's the death zone. That's the knockout zone, whatever you want to call it. That's the death box of the UFC octagon, whatever you want to call it. So Conor, with his back to the cage, he's got to weather the storm. And when you have a fighter that slips and rips the way that Dustin Poirier does, what I saw in that moment of Poirier landing all of those shots consecutively was the experience that Poirier has accrued in his fights with Eddie Alvarez, was the experience that Poirier has accrued with his fights against Max Holloway, Justin Gaethje, Dan Hooker, Anthony Pettis. 5 quality opponents, some of which former champions in the sport, that Dustin Poirier was able to take out in very similar fashion. Dustin Poirier essentially just stuck to the basics within his game. He didn't do anything too crazy in there. This wasn't, it was a brilliant game plan, but it was a brilliant game plan that Dustin Poirier has successfully acted out more than once, more than twice, more than 3 times, more than 4, more than 5 times in his MMA career. And to do it against, for all intents and purposes, one of the best to ever do it. People can disagree with me on that all they want. Conor McGregor is one of the best to ever do it. Where he ranks, that's another topic for another day, but You're doing that against a guy that was a champion in 2 different weight divisions. You're doing that against one of the greatest strikers that the sport has ever seen. So where does that leave Dustin Poirier? Where does that put Dustin Poirier in terms of what's next for him and in terms of how we evaluate Dustin Poirier from here on out? We have to take Dustin Poirier seriously. We meaning all MMA fans, not just diehards like myself, not just hardcore fans like myself, but casuals. Now recognize that Dustin Poirier is one of the best fighters on planet Earth, one of the top 2, top 3 ranked lightweights for a reason. And we have to say now he's in the driver's seat. He stunned McGregor and the MMA world. What is next, though, for Dustin Poirier? What's next for the Diamond? And, I mean, you got a wide variety of options coming off of a win like that. That just re-energizes your career. That gives you a launching pad. Ask Nate Diaz what that win did for his career. Ask Khabib what the win over Conor did for his bank account. Not just your bank account, but what it does for the perception of who you are as a fighter. How dominant, how great you actually are. What's next for Dustin Poirier? I think he's in the driver's seat of whatever matchup he essentially wants. He could actually kick back and wait. We got some word on what's next for Khabib, retirement or not. Dana said something to the tune of, Khabib feels that he's better than the fighters that are available for him to fight, and he's proven enough. So it's looking like it's trending in the way that it looks like Khabib is going to retire. Looks like Khabib is done. Looks like they're going to vacate that UFC 155-pound belt. And when you vacate a title, you got the number 1 contender, obviously Dustin Poirier, versus who? That's the question. Because Poirier has opportunities now that include fighting Conor McGregor again. They're tied 1 apiece. So that's a lucrative fight, the most lucrative fight in the sport, title fight or not. You're making more money fighting McGregor without a belt on the line than you would fighting anyone else with a belt on the line. That's just facts. And I think that Poirier realizes that. He recognizes that. He's a dad. He is a kid. Wants to make as much money to provide for his family as well as give back to the Good Fight Foundation, Lafayette, Louisiana. All that stuff is fantastic. But Poirier, above all, does want to be the champion. And he was close. People don't seem to remember this. He had Khabib in a choke. It was pretty tight. Khabib got out of it, but that was a close one for Khabib. So I think Poirier would be better suited to fight for a title. The question is, Tony Ferguson is out of the picture essentially with 2 straight losses to Gaethje and Oliveira. I would love to see Poirier fight Tony Ferguson in any other circumstance, but right now it just simply does not make sense. Poirier versus Nate Diaz was a fight that was offered to us. Are we really going to give Nate Diaz a title shot coming off of a quote-unquote title fight loss in the BMF, baddest MFer fight with Jorge Masvidal? Crazier things have happened in this damn sport, that's for sure. But do I see that happening? No. The only 2 opponents that I believe make sense for Poirier are Charles Oliveira, who's coming off of that dominant win over Tony Ferguson, or the man that won last night's co-main event, the man that arrived on the biggest stage of his career, Michael Chandler. Now, the tough thing is, ideally, being that they're both fighting on the same night, the same event, one was in a co-main event, the co-main event winner, the other was the main event winner. Timeline-wise, the UFC would love to make that happen just due to the fact that both fighters just recently fought. They're on the same timeline, the same flow. And I'm not taking anything away from Michael Chandler's performance last night. It was astounding. I was stunned by it. And I didn't think it would happen. I thought Dan Hooker was going to win. I didn't do well in the picks department. I picked McGregor and Hooker. That didn't go too well for me. That's safe to say. But with Michael Chandler now on the scene, arriving on the biggest stage of his career, that's only 1 win. And I hate to say this, it's only 1 win, and it's a win that, you're winning against Dan Hooker and you're getting a title shot against a guy that Dustin Poirier had just beaten prior to fighting Conor. That's a little that's a little bit of a tough sell for me. As impressive as that first-round knockout was of Dan Hooker, Michael Chandler took out a very game opponent in Dan Hooker, and a guy that I said prior to this fight night, this fight pay-per-view, UFC 257, I said that Dan Hooker, in my opinion, was the most underrated UFC lightweight in the world. Well, now Michael Chandler is the most underrated UFC lightweight in the world. He just knocked out Dan Hooker in a fight that I didn't think he would win. So, I thought Hooker was the longer, rangier fighter. He'd keep Chandler at a distance. Chandler did not care about the height disadvantage. He got right in there, and he was a tornado as soon as that fight started. So, bravo to Michael Chandler, but I can't convince myself that Michael Chandler deserves an immediate title shot coming off of that performance. I know it's a first-round knockout, UFC debut, bing, bang, boom, that's awesome. But at the same time, getting a title shot in your second UFC fight is a little bit of a tough sell. I think Chandler's got to get one more in the win column, one more in the highlight reel, and we'll see who that's against. Justin Gaethje, I think, is a great opponent. I'd love to see that fight with Chandler and Gaethje. I'd love to see, essentially, Michael Chandler fight Charles Oliveira. If you want to find out which one deserves the title fight more, have them fight one another. I feel like Oliveira, though, is on a hell of a win streak. He should get the shot before Chandler. But if they're not dead set on the drawing power of Charles Oliveira, then obviously put Oliveira in there with Chandler. And if Michael Chandler gets 2 wins in a row over Hooker and Oliveira, then you got, I know it's only one fight and it sounds silly, but then you got some reasoning to put together Chandler for a title fight. But let's just say they do Poirier versus Chandler. Let's just play devil's advocate and say that I'm wrong and they give Michael Chandler the title fight. You bet your ass I'm watching Dustin Poirier and Michael Chandler. That would be a great, great fight. So I kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone there in the whole what's next for Dustin Poirier. I discussed that on the show just now. So the biggest question of the night, being that Conor McGregor lost last night, the next step for Conor McGregor is what? Now, being that Conor is the biggest draw in the history of the sport, I say to myself, I understand what comes with the territory with Conor McGregor being the biggest draw in the sport. I get it. He's going to have opportunities that are silly. He's going to have opportunities that really don't make sense. We're going to hear rumblings of those opportunities like we did when Conor was set to fight Manny Pacquiao. When Conor was trying to get a fight with Floyd Mayweather, we looked at that as, that's ridiculous. It'll never happen. It did happen, and then some. Conor got paid for that fight. Manny Pacquiao, well, is he going to fight Manny Pacquiao? Well, he fought Floyd Mayweather. If he fought Floyd Mayweather, I can't doubt whether or not he'll fight Manny Pacquiao. And this, I'm talking pre-fight. So, I truly feel that all that discussion, all that pre-fight hype of McGregor, whether he should fight Manny Pacquiao, that needs to stop. Because what we saw last night was a fighter that was extremely rusty, that really only had a burst that was ever so fleeting and ever so short. 40 seconds of fight time in 2 years. Ultimately, the rust was seen. And I'm not taking anything away from Poirier in saying that. I'm trying not to. That's not my intent. But watching that fight again, there was not a single leg kick that Poirier threw that Conor McGregor checked. Not one. They added up quickly. When they're not checked, they add up extremely quickly. The damage builds and builds and builds. So, back to the drawing board. And that's the great thing about mixed martial arts. Anyone and everyone is wondering what the hell is next for Conor McGregor after that loss. So it'll bring even more eyeballs to Conor McGregor's career. Whether he wins or loses, he's still the biggest star in the sport. Did his star power take a hit last night? No doubt about it. But the opponents are plentiful for Conor. There are plenty of opponents for Conor to fight. And a guy that I'd like to see him fight is a guy that he's fought twice. I think the time is now. The time has never been more now then right now, for you know what I'm about to say here. The time is now for the biggest fight, arguably, that the UFC could muster up. The next is now. The next fight for Conor McGregor is Nate Diaz, and that's what I want to see. I want to see Diaz versus McGregor 3 inside the UFC octagon, the trilogy of all trilogies. That's what I want to see. Nate's coming off of a loss. Conor is coming off of a loss. It's a fight that the score needs to be settled. We need to find out who's better. We really do need to find out who's better. And it's crazy to say that because Nate Diaz is, 21-11, and Conor is 22-5 now. Record-wise, Nate Diaz has lost a ton of fights, and he's been extremely inactive, but the fight that makes the most dollars is the one that makes the most sense in the business of Conor McGregor. And I think that that's one of the biggest pay-per-views of all time in UFC history. This fight would go down in history as one of the best, biggest UFC pay-per-views as well. So that's what I'd like to see. And I think it's a winnable fight for Conor. It's a big win for Conor if he gets that win. He goes 2-1 in the trilogy with Diaz. He gets another fight. Maybe he takes on Rafael dos Anjos finally. Maybe he takes on Justin Gaethje. Maybe he takes on one of those upper echelon lightweights, maybe Michael Chandler. I think Conor needs 2 wins now to get back into the title fight picture, where with a win over Poirier, he would have been the number 1 contender, as is Poirier now with a win over Conor. So that's how I see it. Let's get to some comments here. Corey says, McGregor did not look like himself. He looked like he lost much weight too fast. I thought physically Conor looked a lot smaller than Poirier. I will say that. Dustin versus Charles, Chandler versus Gaethje. I don't know who doesn't agree with that. That would be a great fight. But listen, everybody, I'm logging off. We got a big show coming. I'm Ryan Thomas. That was the UFC 257 post-fight reaction show. Tyler Dunn will be joining me on the Thomas Take Sports podcast in about 15 minutes, so stay tuned.